Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast where we are reviewing all of the Disney so-called animated classics, reviewing them on their own merits in chronological order and deciding which ones are truly worthy of the title of classics, putting them on our own list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. My name's Ben, and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, which classic are we looking at this week?
Today, Ben, we're taking a look at the 1977 film The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which is in fact a repackage of 3 earlier short films, which means, that's right, we're back to a package film. To start us off then, Ben, going into this, what were your thoughts towards The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh?
A lot of these films I grew up watching and have a lot of fond memories of. This is not one of them. I have seen this film twice, including this most recent rewatch, and the other time I was also very much an adult. I grew up with a VHS of some of the shorts that were made a lot later, so I'm not completely alien to the Disney version of Winnie the Pooh, and I did grow up reading the books as well, so this is a character I have mixed feelings about.
I'm in a similar position to you. I didn't grow up with the books, and I did actually grow up with the Disney version of Winnie the Pooh, specifically all of the odd media that seemed to crop up in the late 80s with TV shows and extra shorts. But I didn't grow up with this film. And in fact, this wasn't a character or a media franchise that I'd thought about much for a very long time until my teenage years, which is when I first sort of re-engaged with Winnie the Pooh, and we'll get to that later. But I have to say, I'm really fond of the Disney version of Winnie the Pooh.
Well, I guess we'll see how much that informs our respective opinions of this film. Now, I was going to say, let's start where we always do by going through the plot. Plot might be a generous term for this film, but we do open with some credits. And I noticed Don Bluth sneaking his way in there, although there's not a lot of overtly sexualised women in this film, so I don't know, maybe it was an off day for him, I don't know.
They're all on the cutting room floor.
And we also get these panning shots of this toy room, presumably made to represent Christopher Robin's toy room, and we can see toy versions of Winnie the Pooh and Piglet and all the other characters. I actually find this opening quite charming and quite relaxing in a way as well.
In many ways, I do really like this opening. However, the big glaring problem for me is that not only are the toys not good representations of the characters we're about to see in animated form, they're not even replicas of Christopher Robin's toys, which we know, they're very well documented, and these all look completely different. And I think it would have been nice if they were either stuffed animal versions of the characters we're about to meet, or they were exact replicas of Christopher Robin's toys.
Yeah, it seems like a weird decision to go with neither.
Right from the start, I think this opening sets the tone of the film perfectly, and that tone is twee as balls.
Yeah, and I think it also sets the theme of childhood imagination and maybe not fully understanding what's going on in the outside world. We're very much contained within this room throughout the entirety of this film, and that's very much where this narrative is going to stay as well.
Speaking of narrative, a big positive I love about this film is the narrator. We have Sebastian Cabot, the voice actor for Bagheera and Lord Ector, returning as our narrator, and I think he is a perfect choice for this series.
Yeah, I think probably my favourite thing about this film is the use of the narrator and the ideas they have with the interaction of the storybook. So as the narrator's going through the story, we are literally flipping pages through a book about Winnie the Pooh, and there's so many just charming little visual storytelling elements or little jokes about something lasting from one page until the other, or the words reacting to the elements. I think it's an element they really do well to play with. Ironically, I think for a package film, the framing device is maybe my favourite part of it.
I wanted to say that it's completely seamless, but it's so much more than that. I've never seen the shorts separate. I've only ever seen them as part of this package film, and if you were to tell me that they weren't all created together and with the whole series in mind, I wouldn't believe you, because the framing device is so well integrated and is such an integral part of the stories we're seeing. The whole book format is completely charming, and one of my favourite elements to it is that everything the narrator is saying is on the page, and you can read along as he's saying it, or you'll see the words appear and then the narrator will say it. And it really gives that feel of this is a children's storybook being brought to life, and I don't think anything has managed to capture that as well as this adaptation of Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, I think it serves double duty, really, because on the one hand, they're very much playing with these are beloved children's stories and they're associated with the illustrations in these books. But on the other hand, they're also playing with the Disney trope itself. Obviously, a lot of these films open with a storybook opening and then they just end with it closing and that's it. But it's nice to have a film that actually revisits that and plays with that throughout the film.
So we open with an introduction to both the 100 Acre Wood and all of the various characters we're going to meet across this film. And this is to the song Winnie the Pooh, which I will say is not only a bop, but might be the greatest contribution that the Sherman Brothers have ever given us.
Now, Liam, I feel this may be the diverging point in this podcast about our views on this film. I think it's fine. I wouldn't describe it as a bop.
I think it is so integrated to the character that, similar to Cruella de Vil, whenever someone mentions that character, you're going to sing the song. Whenever someone mentions Winnie the Pooh, this is the song that's going to come to mind.
Well, actually, I think the song that comes to mind for me is the opening theme from the TV series that's way more cheesy.
Oh, yeah. See, this is what I grew up with, actually, the TV series with Jim Cummings as Winnie the Pooh.
So, yeah, it's not that good. So, when we're going through these introductions, it's quite weird, because, it goes from, house to house, and it's this is Owl. Owl lives in a tree. Rabbit. Oh, this is Rabbit. And then Piglet just fades into existence. They're we're not going to show you Piglet's house. You don't need to see it. Nobody cares.
Well, I assume that this was animated for the package, because famously Piglet was not in the first animated short and was replaced by a controversial character, which is why Piglet was such an important part of the second short for them to basically apologise and say, we're sorry, Piglet's back. I'm wondering if either this was animated after the fact, when it was all put together, or the section with Piglet was added on very, very quickly.
I can believe that, because they do least amount of work possible to introduce Piglet in this opening, so... And this first short very much serves as an introduction to Winnie the Pooh as a character and the kind of shenanigans he gets up to.
And those shenanigans are eating and being a bit of a prick.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that. We open and we see him in his house and he's bumbling around and... Okay, so in some ways I find Winnie the Pooh cute, and I guess we need to talk about one of the main aspects of Winnie the Pooh, which is the voice. It's once again Sterling Holloway, but I'd say this is probably his most well-known performance. And in some ways, I do think he works quite well. I think he's got that gooey, soft element to his voice. But on the other hand, I think there's a million voices I'd prefer.
I will state it is almost certainly because this is not the Pooh I grew up with, but I think I do prefer Jim Cummings' impression of Sterling Holloway as the voice for Winnie the Pooh. It's a really good impression, but it's different enough that I can say, that's Winnie the Pooh to me. Whereas I watch The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and I hear Sterling Holloway rather than Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe it's almost an uncanny valley effect where it's a bit too close to what I'm used to, but it's not what I'm used to, so I assume it's a dead body.
Speaking of dead bodies, something that's very weird about this adaptation of Winnie the Pooh is that it's very clear that Winnie the Pooh is a teddy bear and not... There's a distinct split in the animals where some of them are teddy bears and some of them are real animals. And there's a strange... I think they've edited part of this for Disney Plus, because there's a part where Pooh is doing his morning exercises and his seam splits. And I swear I remember Fluff coming out of him. But watching this on Disney Plus, no fluff comes out of him, and I feel that's been taken out because it's a bit gruesome.
I watched the DVD that came out. Well, actually, it was listed as the 25th anniversary, even though the package I bought it from is like a couple of years old, so that's like 18 years old. And you can see Fluff when he splits open, so yeah, maybe that is a Disney Plus edit. Although, did they edit out what I find the creepiest part of this section, where Pooh's head is spinning 360 degrees on his neck?
I think they must have. I don't remember this at all.
It's weird and it's creepy, and it offsets a lot of the cuteness of the character, quite frankly, knowing he can do that.
This is the importance of physical media, everyone. I think that what Star Wars did for Gen X, Disney Plus is doing for a whole new generation, where they're like, wait, this isn't the film I remember as a child. What have you done to it?
I mean, it sounds like they've improved it, if anything, but... And I know we've talked a little bit about the music already, but I've just got a comment. The music in this, it sounds like it's from the 1950s again. Like, it sounds like we've gone back in time 20 years. And just remember, like, you know, we had all the jazz of the Aristocats and 101 Dalmatians, and then Robin Hood, we had sort of, you know, that, at the time, contemporary folk music. And now we're back to a lot of crooning chorus stuff. I don't like it.
I think that's mostly because of the intended audience being very, very young. So they try to go for more of a lullaby approach. And at the time, and for the Sherman Brothers in particular, the only thing they knew as lullabies was that sort of 1940s, 50s style.
I thought you were going to say, because it's aimed at a young audience, they don't know any better, so they can do rubbish.
I'm not rising to it.
So on the subject of the character of Pooh, I generally find him quite cute in some ways. I think maybe the voice performance does put me off a bit, but I do like the character of Winnie the Pooh. I really do find those stories in their writing very engaging and charming. I find one weird thing is they can't seem to quite decide what Pooh's persona is. So there's quite a few times where he sort of makes an egotistical comment to the narrator, or like flicks his eyebrows in like a, oh, am I the star kind of thing. And I'm like, that's not really what Pooh's character is it? He's meant to be your sort of reliable, but maybe a bit slow and dopey childhood friend.
I'll concede that point. I think it's only really an issue in the first short, where clearly they were finding their feet. And they realised very quickly to lean more into the original writing for the future ones. And after that point, I feel Pooh is very much the lovable idiot that he is in the books. I mean, he's that in the first one, but there are those elements of awareness and interaction with the narrator where he feels like he's in control, which doesn't fit at all. And I will concede that. That said, one thing I struggle about with this film is where to attribute my praise. Is it in the adaptation or is it in the original stories and the writing? A lot of the wit in these films is lifted directly from the books.
I think it's a valid question, but looking back at how we've judged these other films, I'm thinking particularly of Alice in Wonderland, or to a certain degree Peter Pan as well. These are beloved childhood books that are considered literary classics, and particularly with Alice in Wonderland, actually, a lot of it is taken line for line and is a very faithful adaptation, and we gave it praise for that. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say, as a complete package, we're giving the praise there, even if, for certain people, maybe myself included, we'd prefer just to read the original books. I think reviewing this as a film in and of itself, I think it's okay to say that.
And so we have the first of many stories, chapters, if you will, in our film, in which Pooh is out of honey, and with the help of his good friend Christopher Robin, he plans to steal honey directly from bees.
Now, you say good friend Christopher Robin. Throughout this film, they only ever get Christopher Robin when they need something, or things have gone wrong. They never just want to hang out with Christopher Robin.
I hadn't noticed that, but you're absolutely right.
I actually think they should have gone one way or the other with this. They either should have had Christopher Robin just be part of the gang more and interact with the narrator and have Christopher Robin be the main character in that way, or kind of have Christopher Robin leading it and get rid of the narrator, because a lot of these stories are about how Christopher Robin interacts with Pooh and what these stories mean for his understanding of what's going on in the world and processing his childhood. So kind of putting him to the sideline and not really having him there except to kind of solve problems in the plot feels a bit weird.
The problem with your pitch is that it would require Bruce Reiterman to be a main character and do lots and lots of voice recording.
Ah, yes, you're right. They made the right decision.
That's not fair. He did really well in The Jungle Book. What am I saying? I think Mowgli is probably the weakest element of The Jungle Book.
He didn't ruin The Jungle Book.
And so, I mean, this is really the format of the film. There will be a very simple inciting incident. It will lead to an event. It will get resolved. The first one, as I say, it's Pooh getting honey. It's got a couple of nice little songs in it. I know you don't seem to be as fond, but I think they're quite nice little songs. Pooh gets into trouble with bees, ends up in mud. And on that note, I'm really starting to realise that the Disney animators and I seem to massively disagree on what mud is. I couldn't put my finger on it during Robin Hood, but seeing it now for the second film in a row, I think, right, they've got a very clear image that does not agree with my real-world interpretation of mud. I don't think anything else happens in Honey Tree.
I thought you were going to talk about mud more.
No.
Okay. My only other comment on this section is I really like whenever he's falling out of the tree, because he keeps climbing up the tree to get the honey and then has shenanigans with the bees. Whenever he's falling, he kind of defaults to the normal shape of a bear, where sort of all four limbs are out in front of him. I just think that's like a really charming, nice little piece of animation they've put in there.
I think similar to the animators before them studying various animals, I think these animators very closely studied teddy bears.
Which, let's be honest, is a lot easier to study than, wolves or deer, bears.
I'm just picturing the animators on The Lion King where they're all in the studio and someone brings out little lion cubs, and now going back to the 60s, someone just bringing out a teddy bear and putting it on a desk.
Yeah, just dumping it on an animator's desk. There you go. Draw that. So in doing this, Pooh gets some honey. He also gets a mouthful of bees. So he decides to call in on Rabbit, and Pooh is sort of willfully ignorant of all the social norms he's violating, and Rabbit feels obliged to invite him for lunch. And one of the things he offers Pooh, so he offers him bread, and he says, you can have honey on your bread, and he also offers him condensed milk on bread. What the hell is that?
The 60s was a different time.
And then Pooh says, I'll have both.
Oh yeah, he's like, I'll have both, but hold the bread.
So, imagine if I invited you around for lunch and went, here's a slice of bread, I'm going to put condensed milk on that, and then some honey. Enjoy. You'd be like, I'd rather not eat.
I notice as well this is yet another Sterling Holloway character who just invites himself for lunch.
Maybe that's what Sterling Holloway used to do. Maybe he was just like, oh, I hear you need someone to voice a character. Well, actually, great, I'll get started right away. Maybe that's how it kept happening. So, Pooh eats so much that when he tries to leave Rabbit's home, he gets stuck.
What I love about this is Rabbit has a door as well, but Pooh seems to insist on using the rabbit hole.
Yeah, Pooh's just a bit of a jerk. I don't know how else to say it.
I do enjoy, though, that, and again, this is straight from the books, but I enjoy that an entire mini story is just Pooh getting stuck because he ate too much food.
It's quite sweet, and we get all the characters trying to come up with different ways of pulling and pushing, and we get introduced to a gopher, who I'm sure you're going to be a big fan of, Liam.
The gopher is completely just rotoscoped from the beaver in The Lady and the Tramp. It's the same actor. It's the same performance. It's basically the same animation, but with a smaller tail.
If anything, I'd say the speech impediment of the whistling noise is worse.
Much worse. And this was a character that Walt Disney introduced. So I should actually mention, I incorrectly stated that The Jungle Book was the last feature film with the involvement of Walt Disney, but because he was involved personally on the first of these shorts, technically, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh is the last theatrical release to have any involvement from the man himself.
Well, I guess if you want to go down that route, he worked on some of the stuff that technically appears in Fantasia 2000. Yeah, I think calling Jungle Book the kind of last proper film he worked on isn't unreasonable.
Particularly considering that his involvement here seems to have been introducing a character not in the books that was universally panned. They even make a joke about him not being in the books, which I find quite sweet. When Owl is sort of taken aback by this character's mannerisms and approach, and Gopher disappears, Winnie the Pooh just says, after all, he's not in the book, you know. But yeah, this whole thing is just about finding various ways to get Pooh out of the hole, either waiting for him to slim down so he can squeeze out, or maybe trying to force him out, whichever way. The Gopher's suggestion is dynamite. Again, very at odds with the tone of Winnie the Pooh in general, so I can see why a lot of people were not fond of this character, but he's a surviving character to this day. The Disney interpretation of Winnie the Pooh, it's still creating new media, and Gopher is a regular character in that. My favourite part of this scene is how Rabbit reacts to having to live with just Pooh's bum. So his first reaction is to frame it, which, that's a man of my own heart. I love a framed bum on my wall.
Well, you're in luck, Liam.
Oh yeah, there's a moment where the framing doesn't work. He uses it as a little table for a plant pot, and it doesn't work because it doesn't fit with the rustic feel of the home. So he decides to turn Pooh's bum into a hunting trophy instead, which is quite sweet.
A bear's bum.
Well, he sticks antlers in it and paints a little face on it.
It's fine. So eventually Pooh does get pushed free after waiting what seems like months to lose enough weight to get out. I swear they could just widen the door, but fine. And he goes flying into a tree where he gets stuck and eats a load of honey. And he's got his honey, and he's a big greedy bear.
And he's very happy, and then the narrator says that they're going to move on to the next story. Pooh's upset because they're leaving him, and then he's like, it's okay, you're a main character in the next story too. So Pooh obliges and lets them move on.
Which blows my mind, because does that mean for Pooh, time just jumps forward, like he's eating the honey and suddenly he's somewhere else? Does he live the time between those two events? Because Pooh wants to finish eating the honey. Maybe I'm reading too much into this.
I think it's just one of those really nice moments where they're playing with the format and, again, Pooh's awareness that he is a character in a book. I think there's a later one that works really well, but yeah, you're right. This first short, the idea that Pooh is a little too in control and seems to be the cock of the walk of these stories doesn't quite fit with the character, but they're finding their feet, so I'll give it a pass. The second story, however, I would say they found their feet and they nail.
And what's the second story?
The second story is an adaptation of Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, in which we are introduced to Piglet, and alongside Piglet, we get one of my favourite jokes from the books, which is when Piglet is introducing us to his house. He tells us that it's been in the family for generations, including once belonging to his grandfather, whose name is still by the house, and then he points to a sign which is broken away, and all that remains of the sign is Trespassers Will, to which Piglet says is short for Trespassers William, and I think that is incredibly charming.
It's quite weird though, because he says, oh, my grandma used to call him TW, which means that was his grandfather's name. You know, that's not Piglet getting confused, that is what his grandfather was called. And also, it does add a menacing element to it that there was a threat if you went near Piglet's house, which, given what happens later in the film, maybe they should have kept. Now, I find wind intrinsically stressful, because you can't really do anything about wind, just damages stuff. So watching Piglet literally get blown away because he's so small, I find quite upsetting.
This whole sequence, I think, is adorable because of just how pathetic Piglet seems to come across. On that note, the casting of John Fiedler is amazing. That man might have the most pathetic sounding voice ever. And if you're not familiar with John Fiedler, okay, he's raised his voice an octave or two for this role, but that is his voice. If you want to hear it alongside the man himself, one of my favourite films, 12 Angry Men, he's one of the jurors. And I would point out which one he is, but you watch it and you won't need me to point it out because it's just Piglet.
I wish him and Candy Candido had done a podcast together back in the day. Be amazing. One thing I realised during this sequence is that Kanga's eyes are the same colour as her skin, and it looks like they just haven't bothered to colour her in properly.
I've noticed that a few times in films so far. I'm not sure whether it's laziness or a specific technique that they're going for, but yeah, there's a lot of Disney characters where they'll just block fill their head, and in doing so, the whites of their eyes become the colour of their skin. And I think it works with a character like Kanga, but having watched so many of these now, it's really starting to stand out to me. So throughout this segment, we have Piglet being blown about by the wind. Pooh tries to save him, and the two of them end up in Owl's house. There's a nice sequence where Owl is just talking at them, and they can't settle because the house is being blown side to side. And eventually the wind is so strong that it just destroys Owl's house. And so everyone decides that they need to find a new house for Owl. Eeyore very confidently says that it'll take him a day or two, but he'll definitely find somewhere for him to live. And I just think, I wish it were that easy these days.
Nowadays, you can't even ask your weird, depressed donkey friends to find you a house.
And everyone returns home.
Well, not everyone. Owl doesn't.
Sorry. Everyone but Owl returns home. The blustery day turns into a blustery night, and it is raining quite heavily. And it is at this point that we are introduced to probably my least favourite character, which is Tigger.
Yeah, my main note on Tigger is I don't have a lot of time for Tigger.
I believe he's a lot of people's favourite characters. And to me, his purpose is to be to Pooh what Pooh is to everyone else, which is a nuisance.
Except for Rabbit, to whom they are both a nuisance. Yeah, and I struggle to really quantify why. Like, I think the way they animate Tigger's quite good. I think the voice performance is solid. I think it's just intrinsically, it's not a character I find entertaining. I think they set out to do what they're trying to do with Tigger. It's just not something I really care for. I like my tigers a bit camp and charming, a la Shere Khan.
This is more so the case with the 80s TV series and the 2011 film of Winnie the Pooh. But I've always interpreted the various characters to represent different aspects of childhood. And Tigger is that energetic, never stopping, and that kind of energy that children have. And I think that's why he kind of annoys me.
Because children annoy you, don't they, Liam?
Yes, they do. Particularly when they're put in front of a microphone.
It's also during this sequence we find out that Winnie the Pooh sleeps with a gun by his bed.
I always forget about the gun. To be fair, it's not a very effective gun, but it is still a gun.
Yeah, so far we've had a lot of dark Disney moments, we've had a lot of evil characters, and the two characters that sleep with a gun by their bed are Winnie the Pooh and Geppetto. What a world!
And the reason we learn that Winnie the Pooh sleeps with a gun in his bed is because Tigger warns Pooh about heffalumps and woozles, which he says are going to steal Winnie the Pooh's honey.
Whereas actually what they're going to steal is a sequence from Dumbo.
Yeah, so this leads to Pooh having a nightmare about heffalumps and woozles, and clearly he's seen Dumbo because the nightmare is just Pink Elephants. In fact, the music is very Pink Elephants, and I have to say that I'm disappointed with the Sherman Brothers there.
Yeah, I mean, and just to be clear, this isn't something I think they were trying to brush under the carpet. This is very self-consciously a version of Pink Elephants, like sometimes almost shot for shot. Like they have the thing of the two sort of ice skating, ballroom dancing elephants as well. Like a lot of the shape-shifting stuff, they turn into balloons. Like this is just Pink Elephants, and I don't really get why. A, because they nailed Pink Elephants the first time, but B, it's quite a disturbing, surreal and nightmarish sequence. The original is as well, but given the different functions of these two films, it feels like a weird inclusion. Dumbo's clearly designed to be as traumatic as possible, Whereas Winnie the Pooh is designed to be gentle and charming, but this sequence is not. Some of the eyes on these elephants, the dead, endless staring of them is genuinely creepy.
If you're not familiar, go ahead and just watch. It's called Heffalumps and Woozles, and it is strangely shameless. Like, I know we've talked a lot, actually, in the recent ones about rotoscoping. I imagine it was done as a cost-saving measure, and because the animation was there, and they already had music that fit it, it's hard for the Sherman Brothers to come up with something that would fit it as well, so they basically just wrote something very, very similar. But you're right, tonally it doesn't make sense to copy that, because it serves a purpose that is so at odds with the tone of the film. Meanwhile, the rain is getting quite bad, and it's at this point that poor Piglet wakes up to find his house slowly flooding, and he sort of crawls up in bed, terrified of what might happen, before realising that his bed's soon going to be consumed by the water. So he runs to his desk and writes a little note to put in a bottle, and the note just says, "Help, Piglet," and then in parentheses, "me." And then he puts it in the bottle and sets it out, hoping that someone will find it. Which, if you're in desperate need of help, is not something I would recommend.
I mean, his flares were drenched, to be fair, Liam. What other choice did he have?
Or they were just cork-based, like Pooh's gun. And so, yeah, we see Piglet is cast out to sea in just the most terrifying sequence for him. Meanwhile, Pooh is taken to higher ground to protect his honey and sees Piglet floating by and decides to save him, but doesn't actually save him. He just ends up getting into trouble himself.
I don't remember it that way. I remember it as he sticks a honey pot on his head and accidentally falls off, and then bumps into Piglet at the end, and they all go, "Oh, you saved Piglet, well done." And he's like, "Yeah, I did, didn't I? What a jerk." He should have gone, No, I didn't actually. I'm just here. If anything, Piglet saved me. But no, he wants a party.
You're absolutely right. He did nothing to help. And it's Owl, I believe, who is flying over nearby. It's a very funny image of Pooh upside down in the honey pot floating, and Piglet in a little pot being sort of consumed by a whirlwind. A whirlpool, rather.
Yeah, basically Piglet's life is a series of elemental existential crises. In fact, other than fire, that's basically what we get. The first short is about wind ruining his life, the second is about water ruining his life, and the third is about earth ruining his life.
It's strange that, because we said in the last episode that so many of the good Disney films end in fire. So they totally could have had the forest burning down a la Bambi.
Yeah, just recycle it if you're recycling pink elephants. Just have Pooh ride a deer. That's such a good image.
And so Pooh and Piglet are rescued. Pooh takes all the credit, and they decide to throw him a hero party, which I think is quite sweet, albeit undeserved.
But the hero party is interrupted mid-flow by Eeyore saying he's finally found a replacement house for Owl. But say finally, it's been like less than 24 hours. But you know, he's a donkey who's very unhappy.
He's a donkey of his word. He said it would take more than a day or two, and he did it in less than a day.
There is a catch to the house, though, and that is, it is very clearly Piglet's house. And there's so much going on here because, first and foremost, Owl must know that.
Someone needs to know it.
Okay, I'll give Eeyore the benefit of the doubt, but I'm certain Owl knows the fact. And we acknowledge the fact that Pooh and Christopher Robin and Rabbit already know this. Basically, Piglet is peer pressured into becoming homeless.
All because they don't want to upset their depressed friend.
And then Pooh's like, "Oh, you can live with me." And if I was Piglet, I'd just be like, I was just going to sleep on the floor, actually.
I'm not sure this continues. I never seem to remember Pooh and Piglet living together. And in, again, like the 80s TV show, Owl is once again living in a house in a tree. Basically, there's no continuity and I'm upset.
Maybe Eeyore just found someone else's house and the cycle continued. Yeah, also, Eeyore doesn't offer to find Piglet a house.
That's I'd love to see just an endless cycle of this. I'd love to see a show of Eeyore being a real estate agent, actually. Just showing people around houses that other people already live in.
Because they've been driven out because of floods, and then before they can return, you just move in.
And with that, we come to what was the final short, which is Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2. And from the name of that, you might guess that I'm not overly fond of this. I think it is probably my least favourite, but at the same time, it has some of my favourite moments, so it's not all bad.
Basically, the plot is Rabbit is sick of Tigger bouncing. So he basically organises an intervention for Tigger, where he peer pressures his more malleable friends into bullying Tigger to change.
I'd say it's less of an intervention and more organising a mob.
Yeah, because Rabbit's plan to change Tigger, rather than speak to him about it, which as far as I can tell, they've never tried, is instead get him lost in the forest and break him mentally, and then he'll stop being a pain.
If your friends are exhibiting behaviours that you don't like, gaslight them to correct it.
What element of childhood does that represent, Liam?
Pettiness.
Ah.
So yeah, I can sort of take or leave the Tigger segment. I think it's done quite well because it's clearly very mean, this plan, but at no point are we rooting for the plan. We kind of want to see Rabbit get his comeuppance.
Which he does. Tigger does not get lost in the forest because he knows his way around, whereas Rabbit very quickly gets lost. The person I was watching this film with noted that the only time I smiled was when there's a really fat caterpillar joyfully eating a leaf, and I just liked it.
The fat caterpillar eating the leaf is once again just straight up taken from Bongo, of all things. It was my favourite joke in Bongo.
I thought it might be. I actually said, I'm pretty sure they did that in Fun and Fancy Free. So, well, I'm taking that point back, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Part of this section as well involves Roo going out to hang out with Tigger, and Kanga is very keen that Roo wears his scarf to remain warm. I'd argue Roo would be a lot warmer if he wore trousers.
I would not like to try and get a kangaroo into trousers, though. It's more about the anatomy than the actual, the fact that they're quite violent animals. They've got these very strange shaped legs and this massive tail. Trying to get any kind of material that fits around all of that is... What I'm saying is I can understand the animators not wanting to animate trousers on this thing.
I think they just don't like animating trousers. They never do it.
Well, it is Don Bluth.
Touché.
I'm just picturing now when he first started drawing all his sexy ladies and none of them had trousers, and he was like, I thought that was just the way we did things here. I'm sorry, Don, it's not working. Go and found your own studio.
Well, I'll make my own cartoons and I'll have all the sexy ladies in I want. And then they'll get very bad.
While out in the cold, Tigger and Roo end up bouncing too high and they get stuck in a tree. And the two things I really like about this segment are Pooh and Piglet following their own footprints and getting terrified because the footprints keep multiplying, which I think is adorable, and it's that wit from the books. And the other thing I really like is, in order to get Tigger out of the tree, the narrator tips the book so that Tigger can step onto the words that are nearby, and then tilt the book back so that Tigger slides down the words. I think it's incredibly charming and really is probably the highlight of the narrator for me.
Yeah, it's a really sweet moment. I think it works best because they gradually do more and more with the narrator as they go on. I think if they'd opened with that, it might feel a bit too much. But yeah, I think the fact they build it up works well. When Piglet and Pooh are lost in the forest and Rabbit's stormed off, Pooh suggests that if they try going to where they don't want to go, they'll end up going to where they do want to go. And Piglet says, for a bear of very little brain, you're actually quite smart. And that's basically saying, for someone stupid, you're quite clever.
And that to me is the character of Winnie the Pooh, someone who is not very intelligent, but as a result looks at things in a very unique way that it's very sweet and often very insightful. But a lot of the time it is nonsense. Like, if you're lost, aiming for somewhere you don't want to go isn't going to make you unlost. But it sounds sweet, so we'll allow it.
So eventually they all get rescued from the wood and they peer pressure Tigger into changing, but then seeing how unhappy he is, he resumes his bouncing and then inexplicably references Tony the Tiger and Frosties. I don't know why. For reference, imagine at the end of the blustery day where they're having a hero party and Christopher Robin stands up and just says, "A Mars a day keeps the doctor away." It's got nothing to do with anything else that people are talking about.
I could at least forgive it if Tigger was voiced by Candy Candido.
I could forgive anything if it was voiced by Candy Candido. I just like saying the name Candy Candido, to be honest.
And with that, we're reaching the end of the book, and the narrator informs Pooh of this, who very sweetly asks, can we not just go back to the start and read it again? Which I think is lovely. I
also think a lot of parents have then had to sit and watch this film again and then again and again because children just watch films on repeat, hence the 4-year-old test we instituted in this podcast.
And we see just a final brief segment where Christopher Robin is going off to school and the animals of the 100 Acre Wood don't quite understand what this means, but it just means that Christopher Robin's not going to be around as much. And I think it's a really nice closer to a story that is about the adventures of childhood innocence and how you grow up and things change, and it's just a nice little bookend to that story without being too somber or too focused on the whole children grow up kind of thing that Peter Pan, let's say, does.
I think it is quite sweet as an ending. I think really my only criticism of it comes back to what I said at the start, where I'd just like to have seen more of Christopher Robin and Pooh going on adventures together. We've not really seen much interaction between the two of them, and I think this would have gone from being quite a sweet little closer to being maybe quite an emotional scene if we'd had more of that. And maybe they were going for that and wanted the stakes to be low. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think it's maybe my favourite sequence from this, to be honest. I think it captures that right balance, as you say, between having a bit of emotion to it, but also just being very sweet and warm and cosy.
Well, if you want a story in which Christopher Robin features greatly, boy, do I have some recommendations for you, because there are a lot of Winnie the Pooh films, and most of them are Christopher Robin centred, I would say. I think the 2011 one has him in just the right amount, as opposed to The Search for Christopher Robin, which doesn't have him at all, really.
Liam, at what point during this episode have I given you the impression that I want more of this?
Well, speaking of wanting more of this, I want to talk very, very briefly about what brought me back to Winnie the Pooh, which I mentioned sort of happened in my teenage years, because would you believe it? It was the Kingdom Hearts games, because Winnie the Pooh is a very prominent character in those games.
Everyone's a prominent character. There's too many characters.
And the central conceit is that Merlin the Wizard has a magical book and its pages have been torn out. And so the main character, Sora, goes into the book and it's the 100 Acre Wood, but it's empty except for Pooh's house. And Pooh is the only one there and he can't remember why he doesn't remember anyone. He just knows that he's forgotten something. And the whole plot is just about finding the pages, bringing them back as you adventure through the other world. Each one will bring a new character to 100 Acre Wood, along with a new minigame, and at the end of it, you basically fulfill the role of Christopher Robin in this final sequence, but instead of being a 4-year-old boy going to school, instead, you're a 13-year-old Japanese anime character going to fight God.
I don't feel like that's an improvement.
It's not, but you get to spend the right amount of time with the characters, and also you get to see the characters interacting with a facsimile of Christopher Robin, and you're right, it works so much better when you have a character who has their own understanding of the world that is more aligned with being correct, having to explain it to this forest of absolute idiots. And I think that's when Winnie the Pooh works best for me, is when you have Christopher Robin trying to explain very complicated issues that he himself doesn't understand to a bear that frankly doesn't care.
And then after they say their goodbyes, we close the book. The toy of Winnie the Pooh does a little wink, And then we close, and that's the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
Now, I think it's clear from this that you have a very different opinion of this film than I do.
Yeah. Okay, so this is clearly a film made for quite young children. Some of these other films are maybe a slightly older audience in terms of plot and themes, maybe, or just even like dialogue. I think this is for very young children who don't necessarily even need to be able to follow a story to be able to enjoy something. So I'm not automatically knocking it for that, but I just don't think there's a lot here. The things people find charming about this film just don't seem to resonate with me at all. I find it quite boring. I don't think the tone is very consistent. The animation's okay, and there's some charming ideas in there. I think the toy room setting is nice. I think the world of Winnie the Pooh in a very general sense is very engaging. And I think what you said is bang on about the narrator bringing so much of it to life and being the highlight of it. But even though I've only seen this film once before this rewatch, I was dreading it. And then I was so bored. I didn't enjoy it.
In a way, I resent that I find this film so charming because it's twee in that way that conservative England, and I mean that in the traditional sense, not the political affiliation, but that conservative England view themselves, and there's this idyllic view of the English countryside. It's similar to problems I had with Wind in the Willows, and again, I quite like Wind in the Willows because I like that world. And in a way, I resent that I find that tweeness charming. That said, I think what I love about these stories and these characters is the wit and the charm of the writing, which is lifted directly from the books. And we've talked in previous episodes about what it means to be a successful adaptation, and I think this is a really successful adaptation of Winnie the Pooh. I think it brings it to life in a way that I don't think any other adaptation has managed to do. I would argue this is one of the most successful adaptations of a property, to the point where Winnie the Pooh is now so synonymous with the Disney version as opposed to the original books. Obviously, people are aware of the books, but Winnie the Pooh to so many people means the little yellow prick that Disney animate.
I think that's actually a really valid point, because I gave the comparison of Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan earlier, but there are other versions of those that are well known and beloved, and those Disney versions, whilst very famous, aren't considered the definitive version of those stories, where I think you're right. I think in a lot of ways this is considered the version of Winnie the Pooh. Not necessarily everyone's ideal version of it, but yeah, I think this is it.
Whether you think it could do with a stronger narrative or other characters should have more of a prominent role, all of the characters in this film are the perfect bringing to life of the characters in the books, and I think that alone is incredibly impressive.
So before we pass our final judgments on Winnie the Pooh, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding this film?
Can we not?
Liam,
just once, please.
We've started, so we'll finish. Who is the sexiest character in the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and why is it either Kanga or that one bee that has long eyelashes?
Well, I feel odd saying it's Kanga, simply because she's the only female character in this world. And I worry that that would be why I'm saying she's sexy. Also, I don't think she is. I think she's just a very plain kangaroo. She's also exactly the same character model as Roo, but blown up. So,
what we're going for as the sexiest character in this film is a sexy bee.
It has to be the bee, I suppose. I was trying to think if I could explain any way in which you would find rabbit or owl or Eeyore sexy. Definitely not Tigger, he annoys me. Piglet's too adorable. And Christopher Robin is a 4-year-old boy, so we're stuck with a bee, I think.
It's a very sexless film by design. It's almost like they didn't want 40 years later two guys trying to work out which character was the sexiest. But that can't be the case.
So then, Ben, with that decided, the only thing we have to decide is whether or not The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh is making it onto the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. I've rolled out the scroll. I've got my honey pen ready. Ben, do you think this film deserves a place on the list?
Well, it's weird. Having this conversation and listening to you talk about it, you've kind of convinced me that I'm right and it's not a good film.
God damn it.
I think for a lot of people, maybe it's clouded by nostalgia, but I think, honestly, if you rewatched it now, there's films for very young children that I think are better films. I think Dumbo is. I think Jumping Forward, I think something like Waly is perfect for a young audience. This,
Well, unsurprisingly, I'm going to disagree, and I really think this deserves a spot on the list, which means it's going to go into the wings and it's going to wait. But I'm also not out of hope, because this isn't the last Disney animated classics to feature these characters. There's going to be a film coming up much later, and just maybe my favourite yellow friend will make it onto the list.
In instances where we do disagree, we throw it out to our listeners and ask, which side of the coin do you fall on? Do you accept Liam's argument that this is endlessly charming and it should get by on the merits of how it engages with those ideas of childhood? Or do you agree with me and that it is just a bit too insubstantial and a bit too twee? We're always interested to know what your opinions are, and also to see if there's any other suggestions for Sexiest character, because honestly, it's horrible this week.
And with that, that is our discussion of the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Ben, what are we going to be taking a look at next time?
Next week, we are looking at RESCUE, the Rescue Aid Society. We are visiting the Rescuers that also came out in 1977.
I'm really excited to revisit this one. It's not a film I've seen a great deal of, but what I have seen of it, it's quite unique in the Disney catalogue. So I'm definitely keen to revisit, see how I feel about it, and see what you think about it as well.
So we'll join you next time, and until then, this has been Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.